Lisa Barkhuizen here on EQ for Relationships, where we connect heart to heart, because sometimes the heart wants more. Today with me in the studio is Juliana Sellers, informing us on how to deal with grief. Welcome, Juliana.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
So tell me also, what motivated you to start Grief Basics?
So Grief Basics is a more recent compilation of just some of the things that I've found to be helpful in my grief journey. And I just felt like I wish I had a toolbox that had a bunch of these tools together. And as I was kind of thinking through, how do I teach people these things? An acronym for basics kind of came into my mind, and I kind of went through, okay, these are ways that I can teach people. So the acronym for basics stands for, the B is for breathe. The A is acknowledge what's happened. S is for self-compassion and self-care. I is for identify needs. C is connect with supportive people. And S is stay present.
Why would you say is grief work so important?
Grief work is important because I don't think we can live fully while we're trying to avoid feeling. I think one of the important things I discovered is it's not possible to numb out just part of our emotions. Our emotions are kind of an all or nothing thing. When we're numbing out through addictions or just obsessions or focusing on other things and trying to push feelings away or stuff them down, we numb all of our emotions, and we can't feel joy or pleasure, happiness, while we're trying to numb sadness and pain and grief. And so for me, grief work became the sacred space of stripping away all the stuff that doesn't matter, of letting everything break up that I thought I knew, letting go everything that I thought I knew, and putting the pieces back together in a powerful way. I feel like this is the piece that society doesn't teach us. They teach us get over it, move on. And so people learn to stuff the emotions and pretend they're fine. And they learn to live life in kind of this numbed out way. And it's really sad because we can't live life to the fullest unless we're willing to feel the whole gamut of emotions. And I feel like that grief work is what allows the healing, that allows us to feel deeply both the difficult emotions as well as allowing ourselves to feel joy and happiness and all those things later.
So you are saying that it's very important to feel and to cherish what you are feeling, and as if almost to be in that moment, whatever you are feeling, to be aware of that. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, our emotions are energy in motion. They're designed to bring us awareness and to help connect us with the world around us. And we've been taught to be afraid of over half of our emotions, in some form or another, whether it's fear or anger or sadness or, any really powerful emotion, even joy to a certain degree. We're taught, something might happen. Don't let yourself get too happy because then you're just going to be let down and disappointed. And we've learned to kind of take that edge off all of our feelings, and it takes away a certain dynamic of information that could come to us if we weren't numbing out those emotions, as well as just living our lives more fully, feeling and connecting and engaging in the way that we're supposed to, that we were created to.
So you remarried. Is it difficult to remarry after the loss of a partner?
It is actually, because grief is the price we pay for love. And no one knows better than a widower that price that you pay for love. Society, once again, has kind of a mixed up perception that somehow, if I marry again, then I'm no longer a widow and I'm no longer sad. And, it's kind of a weird, twisted version of replace the loss. And one thing that I want to be really clear about is my husband now is not a replacement for my deceased husband. They're incredibly different men that I love for entirely different reasons. And yes, I do love both of them. And it's a really strange emotion to be able to love two men at the same time. But I found, someone explained it as, like, when you grieve, your heart breaks open, and then as it heals, your capacity for love expands. And I believe that's true. As we heal, as we do the grief work, as we learn the compassion and the lessons from the experience that we've had, it does open our heart for us to be able to connect again. And that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges in my current marriage, because I think every couple has baggage and different situations they have to work through, and relationships are messy. But there's a commitment there, and we do love each other, and we're committed to talking through and working things out. And I think that that's the most powerful piece that makes our marriage work now, is that commitment. That even when it's messy and even when it's uncomfortable, that, even just this morning we were joking, well, you're stuck with me now, and in a good way. But just knowing that we have each other's backs even when we're not perfect is really a beautiful thing.
If I might ask, you received bad news, when your husband died, and then you had to work through that grieving process. But then your daughter had even more bad news. How did that affect you? How did it change the family dynamics? And also, did what you learned from the grieving process, did it help you cope this time as well?
Right. So just to give the dynamics of what happened, my oldest daughter was 10 years old when my deceased husband passed away. I'd been married to him from the time she was 7 to 10 years old. And my other children had moved through the grieving process. They were moving forward. They're making a lot of progress. And my oldest daughter was having more and more significant health challenges, some mental health issues. There's just a lot going on that didn't really make sense. And this kind of came to a head about a year ago. It had been 5 years since Joel passed away. And she finally got up the courage to tell me that he had been sexually abusing her during the time, most of the time that he was married to me. I'm not even sure where to start with all of the emotions that ran through me when she told me what had happened to her. I believe her. I support her. I reassured her. That was my original go-to, was to make sure that she knew she hadn't done anything wrong, and that I was really glad that she told me. And it was interesting because I was just learning about this grief growth process and that whole cycle just as I got this news. And so I was learning, there are two major ways that we have change in our lives, and one is sudden impact change, like when there's a death or news like abuse, or something that changes the whole way that everything we thought we knew about the world and the way it works. And then there's incremental change over time. And so this news that he had molested my daughter was sudden impact change. And it threw me really deep into that cycle of trying to sort through all the anger, all of the sadness, there was also a certain level of I told you so's and apologies that were required because my ex-husband had been trying to tell me his suspicions even while the abuse was happening, and I was not able to believe it at the time. And so there were all these conflicting dynamics and emotions, and I'm not going to say that they've all been neatly processed through and I've tied them up in a bow and everything is hunky-dory now, because honestly that's a lie. There's still a lot that I'm sorting through, that those pieces are really broken and really shattered right now. And there are times I question, was that love or was that just serving his twisted needs or twisted desires? But I've watched my daughter heal. What I thought was the effect of unprocessed grief was actually the impact of the shame and the secrecy. And whether it's mental health or whether it's abuse, I think what causes the most damage is the shame and the secrecy. And so watching her heal as she had a safe place to release everything that happened, and as she stopped trying to protect everyone else in the situation and just started being honest, it's broken open so much more healing. And she's so brave. She's so outspoken about it. She writes really powerful poetry, and she wrote a really powerful Me Too poem about it. So I would say I'm still kind of in the grief work process with figuring out the different pieces of, it's part of the messiness that is human dynamics. I strongly don't recommend getting into abusive relationships or allowing your children to be abused, but I've also learned a lot of compassion for, I did the best I could at the time, and I honestly didn't know what was happening. It's interesting because my ex-husband's go-to, and part of my go-to is to blame myself and all of the what ifs and why didn't I see that, but I've had to learn to just have compassion and realize I did not abuse my daughter. I did not know what was happening to her.
If you look back, were there any warning signs that you could tell viewers perhaps what to look out for?
In retrospect, hindsight is 2020. Looking back, there were times when we were dating when I would set down a boundary, and he would completely ignore it. There were times when I would ask him not to talk bad about my ex-husband in front of the kids, and he would ignore that. There was a lot of control dynamic, even just in our dating, and he threw a major temper tantrum, for lack of a better word for it, and didn't talk to me most of the night, and I was ready to break up over it. I was like, fine, if that's the way you're going to be, and so he circled back around and covered it over and moved on. But looking back at the emotional manipulation now, I'm like, that wasn't healthy, that wasn't good. But I was 26 years old. I had come from a really codependent relationship, and I just didn't know the signs or the warnings or the flags or to listen to my body. I think that would have been a huge insight for me at the time, was to pay attention to the times when I was feeling uncomfortable in my body. Because I was so used to just ignoring that and pretending everything was fine and putting on a happy face that, if I look back, there were times that I was uncomfortable with what was happening. And I just learned to cover it over or pretend it was fine or put on a happy face. So that's something. that I'm working on now is listening to my body and listening to those sensations and just paying attention, because our body keeps the score when it comes to trauma and when it comes to things like that. Our bodies know so much and we tend to not listen.
Beautiful. So, Juliana, you are showing us that emotions are a tool to help us cope with grief and healing and starting over. If you can just summarize for us in one sentence, how did you overcome?
I learned to stay present, one day at a time. Learned to breathe, and I reached out for support. That seems to be my normal go-to when I'm in the midst of things just being way too big and way too overwhelming, is that relying on my family, my faith, and on my Savior. Those are some pillars of strength that I've had my whole life.
Beautiful. Also tell me, during the time of his death, what were the feelings that you had to deal with, and which actions were required of you?
Oh goodness. I think at the time I was just numb because the feelings would have been too much to deal with at that exact moment. I remember just feeling really calm when I held him as he took his final breath, and it was almost a surreal calmness. I just kind of knew, and everyone else went back to their regular life, and I think that's when it finally sunk in that everyone else's life had gone back to normal and mine would never be the same.
Tell me, Juliana, the people that supported you, what were some of the most memorable and cherished moments?
Hospice had a great support person that checked in with me every month. Mostly she just listened, which is one of the most powerful things, I think. Grief needs to be witnessed with non-judgment, and she was amazing at doing that for me. And she would alternate doing activities with the kids and then coming and just listening to me vent about everything. So
it was it were more the practical stuff than people's words that really helped you to cope during that time.
Right. I honestly don't remember much of what people said to me, but the people who provided food or gave me hugs or took the time to listen, supported me with something that the kids needed. Those are the things that really stood out more so than anything somebody said, honestly.
And also tell me, how did the kids deal with the loss?
It was a big challenge, especially for my oldest child. And I think a component of that was the dynamic with my ex-husband, because my children went to his house every Thursday and every other weekend. And there was kind of this unspoken, like, we're not going to talk about him, we don't like him, and just don't mention his name at my house, was kind of the general attitude. So they would bottle up their emotions the whole time that they were at their dad's, and then they would come back to my house and kind of fall apart. So I got to a point, I didn't schedule any clients, I didn't schedule any work on those Monday afternoons when they would come home from school after the weekend at his house, just so we could have time to cry or to, just for me to listen to whatever was coming up for them. I guess this would kind of go with one of those memories. I had a friend around that time that posted the song Blessings on her timeline, Laura Story's Blessings. And it talks about, what if our blessings come through raindrops? What if our healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? One of the things that really stood out with supporting my children was I had to learn very early on that they couldn't be my support. They were 10, 8, and 5 years old. They were dealing with more than most kids their age have to deal with. And they just don't have the resources to be the support for an adult. And so it became very important for me to find support and resources outside of my children. So I would vent to my sister or my counselor, or I found support groups and other resources and other places where I could go and vent and process and get the support that I needed so that I could be there when my kids needed to dump their buckets and express how they were feeling and vent, and they needed a safe place to come. And I think that's an important skill, once again, that we're not taught. We need to know where we get our strength from and to be able to put our own oxygen mask on first, so to speak, and find the support that we need in order for us to be able to be there for the people who are relying on us. So in order to support children or other people who are really dependent on us, we have to find strength and support. None of us was meant to do this alone. And I think that was another big aha. So I didn't have to carry the burden all myself. There were other people who were willing and able to support me in different ways. And I just had to learn where to find the different kinds of support that I needed and be willing to reach out and pull that into my life.
Beautiful. Thank you, Juliana.
I have an angel mother who is incredibly amazing. And one of the things that she taught me as a very young person was that we would have adversity in life. And when adversity comes, she taught me to just learn as much as I could about it. And so that was my tendency. That was just the way that I learned to move through challenges. When I was facing divorce, I learned as much as I could about it. When my daughter was diagnosed with autism, I learned as much as I could about that. When my husband's kidney failed, I learned about kidney failure. And so it was just natural when he passed away to learn about grief and grieving. And I was just appalled at how little we're taught that's really effective and helpful. He made a choice to end medical treatment, knowing that the disease he had was 100% fatal. And I had to try to work around it every possible way I could while still trying to honor his desire not to go back to the hospital before I finally had to just accept his decision. I had things set up to the point all he had to do was go back to dialysis, and his doctor would sign off on the home medicine, and we would get him on the right antibiotics, and maybe there'd be a chance, and he refused to go. And I think that morning was when it finally sunk in. He really is done, and this really is his choice, not mine. And looking back, I was actually really angry. I didn't let myself feel that at the time. But
during his illness, what was the most draining experience of all?
It was hard to balance how to care for him, how to respect his wishes, and how to protect myself and the kids emotionally. And of course, during this time, my ex-husband felt like the kids shouldn't be exposed to death. and so I had this dynamic going on with my ex-husband. I had the things going on with my husband, and then just the reality of this is really happening that hadn't quite settled in kind of over the whole thing. So
how did you cope with all of that?
Well, I called my mom. And of course my faith in my Savior. You know, I've always just turned to my knees when things get overwhelming, and I find that when I do cast my burdens on the Lord, either I get stronger, He sends me help, or the burden seem lighter, or usually some combination of all three. When I'm in the midst of things just being way too big and way too overwhelming, is that relying on my family, my faith, and on my Savior. Those are some pillars of strength that I've had my whole life.
Beautiful. Also tell me, during the time of his death, what were the feelings that you had to deal with, and which actions were required of you?
I think at the time, I was just numb because the feelings would have been too much to deal with at that exact moment.
Please tell our viewers how they can connect with you.
Right? If they'd like to connect with me, they can email me at info@chooselifeagain.com. They're welcome to visit my website, chooselifeagain.com. They can go to Facebook/chooselifeagain community. And if they email me at that info@chooselifeagain, I am developing an assessment that can help give them an idea of where they are in their grief journey and what kind of support I would recommend for them. So, you know, I would just encourage, if they have questions or would like to just share a piece of what they've been through with me, I just encourage them to email me there at info@chooselifeagain.com.
Well, thank you so much, Juliana. It was really an insightful discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching. Join us next week for another powerful episode when we learn how to overcome and manage our emotions. Thank you. So she has really put into practice what you taught, and it helped her amazingly.
Yeah. She's been so amazing, and I've really learned a lot from her, watching her straddle two incredibly different worlds. Like, she would come to my house and she would fall apart, and we would process all the emotions, and she'd go to her dad's and put on the facade and pretend she's fine, because it wasn't okay to grieve there.
Yeah.
And so she's bridged the gap between these two separate worlds for a really long time, and I'm sure that plays a part in her mental health issues, because when we become really aware, it's hard to live a lie and not make ourselves sick. And so she was aware it wasn't safe to live her truth, but she was too aware to live the lie without becoming physically ill.
So did he decide that you have to switch off the machines, or was it that he didn't want to live anymore? Or
he walked out of the hospital against medical advice. He had contracted a heart infection,